Without a stable conception of the object of life, man would not consent to go on living and would rather destroy himself than remain on earth, though he had bread in abundance. This quote by the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoyevsky gets to the core of why we opt for the path of hating ourselves. Simply put, our self-hatred festers inside us when we lack meaning and purpose in our lives. If we haven't created a meaningful purpose to strive for, feelings of loneliness, despair and anguish will bubble up to the surface. If the meaning of life remains ambiguous to us, we'll be overwhelmed by difficult feelings caused by our aimlessness, and then these negative feelings will accelerate and we'll resort to inflicting pain both mentally and physically on ourselves when things get difficult. In this video, I'll look into why we make masochistic choices to allow our self-hatred to fester to the boiling point, as well as offering practical solutions to reduce the power of negative thoughts that occur. If you want more videos like this, subscribe or leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow and it's good to see some engagement. Thanks. There is nothing in the world, I venture to say, that would so effectively help one to survive even the worst conditions as the knowledge that there is a meaning in one's life. The power of this quote by the writer Viktor Frankl comes from the context of his life in the 1940s, when he was forced into a concentration camp. Overcoming his seemingly hopeless sentence, which totally restricted his human freedom, should serve as a wake-up call for us and dispel the myth that our problems are unsolvable, if only you're willing to put up with the pain. You need a high threshold for pain to stop you from quitting when things get difficult. One reason you may suffer from self-hatred is because you have a low threshold for pain. If you get overwhelmed easily and you're always looking for any way to escape uncomfortable and unpleasant situations, you have a low tolerance for pain. Because of your low pain threshold, you rarely give a situation enough time and patience that it deserves to find a solution, so a swift exit will always seem the most appealing. However, this habit to escape when things get tough is terrible for growth, as you'll be blind to the regenerative value found in being responsible for something. Frankl would agree that this is the secret to overcoming suffering, with him saying, "Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems and to fulfill the task which it constantly sets for each individual." There's a familiar comfort to self-hatred that we're drawn to. If we're used to our negative feelings so much that we actually expect their presence, it will only accelerate our negative emotions so that they'll become more and more familiar, so you begin to welcome them with open arms. This results in us becoming more cowardly and masochistic when faced with our negative emotions. In this sense, familiarity breeds complacency, and the longer you sit and ignore what should be done, the more challenging the obstacle becomes in your mind. To illustrate this further, the writers Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette use an example of an anxious salesman who sits at his desk, staring at his list of contacts, too nervous to pick up the phone. The longer he sits at his desk, scared to start dialing, the more challenging the task seems to him in his head. What scares an individual into this state of paralysis is the fear of committing themselves to a decision. What the salesman fails to realise is that doing nothing is also a choice. The founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, would say that his impulse to sabotage his own happiness won out over his life instinct, which favours pleasure over pain. To Freud, this pull towards pleasure that we all have inside us is constantly at odds with our death drive, which seeks a destructive conclusion to a persistent problem. An apt term for this driving force offered by Freud is the bed-rotting instinct. When we fall short of the person we think we should be, it becomes a tempting prospect to make things even worse for ourselves. For example, say you're an alcoholic and you relapse with one drink. Once you break the seal, it becomes easier to rationalise the next drink. This is because once your principles are broken, your life begins to lose meaning and your feelings of responsibility dwindle. Or if you're edging closer to your overdraft and then a payment takes you into negative figures, your mind will see that you're already in the negatives, which in turn makes it easier to convince yourself to spend more. Instead of taking time to figure out a rational solution, our lack of meaning makes us irrational, trusting shortcuts instead. If we feel unpleasant and agitated, rather than sitting with and getting to the root of those feelings in a calm and rational way, we often regress and wallow in feelings of self-pity. In this volatile state, we'll seek anything that offers us an out from the pain. These outs are shortcuts which promise a simple answer to a complex problem. However, as the writer Thomas Sowell once said, there are no solutions, only trade-offs, and we'll always pay a price for taking a shortcut. These tempting shortcuts frazzle our brains into asking the wrong questions. This is what the psychologist Lisa Barrett discusses in her insightful book, How Emotions Are Made. When we expect a quick fix, we're blind to the right questions. We may say, why is this happening to me? Am I depressed? Am I sick? The issue with these questions comes from our expectance of an instant answer. If we fail to answer these questions quickly, we concede. Once we give up and proclaim, I can't take this anymore, we devise an overly simplistic exit strategy to escape from the pain that we've created. In her discussion of negative emotions, Barrett offers the Buddhist concept of the two arrows to demonstrate how we inflict unnecessary pain when we are knocked off course. She argues that when something bad happens to us, we're hit with the first arrow of emotional or physical pain, but the second arrow, Barrett says, we shoot ourselves. It's the mental suffering that our thoughts create. When we say, I feel so awful, and begin to wallow in our pain, we're firing the second arrow and unnecessarily adding more pain to the mix. To Barrett, if we can recognise that our thoughts are the second arrow, we can remove that additional layer of pain and be left with simple discomfort. To reduce the power of these negative thoughts, the psychologist Tara Brach suggests using two aspects of radical acceptance: recognition and compassion. Recognition means mindfulness observing negative thoughts as they arise, whilst compassion means responding to the negative feelings in the same way that you would tell a friend to, rather than resorting to self-hatred and berating yourself. Once you incorporate both aspects of radical acceptance when negative thoughts arise, you'll be able to respond to them with care and kindness. Do away with perfection, or you'll be too hard on yourself. You must be okay with falling short of perfection. If you see yourself as a perfectionist, your obsessive nature will be at the detriment of your happiness, and you'll never be satisfied. Besides, things rarely go exactly how you expect. Panicking over something unexpected and getting bitter at the cards you were dealt demonstrates a lack of awareness of the unpredictable nature of our existence. Life rarely goes to plan, and if you yell at the world, "Why me?" you're wasting energy trying to control the uncontrollable when you could be spending time finding meaning in your life. As John Lennon poignantly wrote, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans, so you may as well give up chasing order and perfection, as you'll never be satisfied, only resentful. When we reframe perfection so that it's not the be-all and end-all, our self-hatred dissipates, and we become more receptive to the ideas that deserve attention because our calmer state of mind invites clarity. Potential obstacles that are causing self-hatred to fester. If you give too much credence to your feelings and your inner critic, just because you feel a negative emotion doesn't mean it's valid. Emotions are not always wise, and we often put too much weight into our feelings, believing them to be an accurate response to the reality of the situation. In fact, our emotional patterns may just be a coping mechanism for a deeper underlying problem, a desperate attempt to hold on to the emotion that we think will solve our problem. These emotional coping mechanisms will be abundant if your inner voice is too critical. If you have a negative opinion of yourself, it may be too solidified and your inner critic too loud that you're always looking to pleasure to fix your issue. Therefore, talk back to your inner critic when its negativity is causing you to repress a deeper unmet need. Unchecked trauma/bullying. If in the past you suffered a traumatic event and you blame yourself for it, you may have pent up shame that is affecting your happiness. This comes up to the surface when a situation reminds you of this past event, and in reliving it, the shame convinces you that you have a deep character flaw. You might not even realise what past trauma is affecting you. It can be any moment in your past where you were called out for an imperfection. They say your childhood memories are your most impactful, still evoking strong feelings in adult life when an event reminds you of this past encounter. Say it's an insecurity, the next time you are placed in a relevant situation, if you haven't come to terms with it, you'll likely flare up and in your embarrassment will react as you did the first time. You have an all or nothing mentality. If you see your life as either good or bad with no grey area, when you display less palatable emotions, you will feel ashamed of it and will attempt to repress its power and lock it away. This is the wrong decision, as when we block any emotion, it will always come back when we least expect it. Not only will you be more cruel to others, your inner shame and denial of your true nature will harm yourself. With this, remember that living a cruel life is the result of failing to overcome one's inner demons, a failure to find meaning in your life. Also, remember that bitterness will always pass. As Dostoyevsky wrote, it's the great mystery of human life that old grief passes gradually into quiet, tender joy. Thanks for watching.